Hello and welcome to Money Tips. This is Charles Kelly bringing you money tips to help you save, earn, accumulate, invest and ultimately enjoy more money. Now, talking about more money, I want to talk to you today about the abundance of money and the fact that there is a lot of money around. Now, I recently read that the footballer Salah that tragically died on the way from France to Cardiff City. As you know, his plane went down into the ocean, and the rescuers gave up on looking for any survivors. It was him and a pilot, but his family still wanted to look for the wreckage and obviously his body, and they didn't have the money to do that themselves. It wasn't, the government are not going to look for it, so they had to raise that money privately. And the story is that within a few days of sort of putting something out on a crowdfunding site, they had managed to raise £300,000 within a couple of days. Now that's £300,000 out of thin air. So where did that come from? It just came, didn't it? People said, right, I'll pledge that money. And they raised the money, and they sent out some rescuers, and they found the wreckage and the body within I think a day. So it was very fast. But the money was raised really, really quickly. So it just goes to prove that despite what some people say, there's no money around, no one's got any money anymore. There is a lot of money around. That £300,000 is just a drop in the ocean. In fact, there are trillions and trillions of dollars and pounds and euros just milling around in the system, in cash deposits, in people's pockets, in people's bank accounts, just waiting to be spent. And that doesn't include what they've saved into pension funds and what venture capital people are holding and hedge funds and all these. There are trillions of dollars again for people looking for investment opportunities. These are hedge funds, venture capital funds, all looking for the latest opportunity in which to invest. And every day and every year, thousands of businesses are started up with venture capital funds and with bank loans and whatever. So there is plenty of money around out there. And that's the mindset you've got to have, because if you're coming from the mindset of a scarcity mindset, then you're going to think, well, there's no money around. Why would I start a business when no one can afford anything and everyone's broke? Because that's maybe what the situation you're in. It doesn't mean that everybody else is in that situation. And I've lived through quite a few recessions, and I know that there are people who in that recession will lose everything and will always be broke. But there are still people that go through those recessions. They've still got the same house, they're still driving new cars, and somehow that doesn't seem to affect them. So there are people who have got money and will always have money, and there is plenty of money around. So you've got to believe that. People with the right mentality know this, and I'm thinking of an example of John Lennon, for instance. I think it was his first wife asked him, for a swimming pool. They had a house, and she said, I want a swimming pool. Where can we get the money for that? And he just said, I'll write you one. I'll write a song, and we'll have that pool. And that's what he did. There was the Hare Krishna movement, another Beatles story actually. This time involving George Harrison. And when the Hare Krishna movement approached George Harrison, because the Beatles were into that stuff in the 60s, and they approached George Harrison and asked him, they needed a property in which to have a centre. Now he found them a huge house, very, in Hertfordshire, quite near to London, near Bushey, Aldenham area, and he had a massive house with a huge amount of land around it, acres and acres of land, and he donated this property to them, and he wrote an album. I think his album All Things Must Pass, which sold millions and millions of copies. And do you remember the single My Sweet Lord, which mentions the Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna in the song? And that money apparently was used to help fund this movement. And if you go to that place, it's called the Bhakti Aventi Manor, and it's near. If you look it up, Bhakti Aventi Manor in Watford, you can visit the manor, and you can see the George Harrison Garden. So they still honour George Harrison, but he didn't think about things from a scarcity mentality. I know he had a lot of money at the time anyway, but these people don't think in that way. They don't think, well, I'll dip into my savings. They'll just find the money from somewhere. Obviously, they still donate a lot of money as well. George Michael, for instance, donated over £10 million of his own money into various charities. He did it quietly, didn't make a big song and dance about it, excuse the pun. But I also heard a story of a guru in India that needed millions of dollars to fund a new temple. And he was asked the question, where is the money going to come from? And his reply was so simple. He just said, from wherever it is now. How simple and how profound that is. From wherever it is now. He knew the money was there, and they said, where is it going to come from? He said, from wherever it is now, it will come to me. Now, he didn't just sit there chanting about it. They obviously went out and looked for it. He didn't just go, the money will come, the money will come. No, they had to do something to find it. Just like when the Hare Krishna movement came over to the UK to set up, they had no money. They just come with a few guys. I've heard this, I've read this story, and they actually looked for the Apple company in Savile Row at that time, where the Beatles had an office, and they just went there. And I believe the story is they went and brought some food there. They brought some food and said, we're looking for help. So they sent their disciples out. As you read in the Bible, the disciples went out 2 by 2. So it's not just about praying for the money or meditating on it. They actually do something. So remember that the action still has to be taken. And it's all about the right level of mindset. That's what I'm talking about. It's money mindset, really. It's knowing that the money's out there, knowing that you can get it. Now, I'll give you another example. Now, in the early 90s, when I didn't really have the right mindset at that time, I'd lost a lot of money through various ventures, and property prices were at rock bottom, and my mentality, my mindset was probably at rock bottom as well, because I'd just been through a rough time. It was a really bad recession. Interest rates were high, lenders were not lending, and it was a really bad time. And experts were saying that the property market would take 20 years to recover, which was, of course, nonsense. And from my financial background, I knew this was nonsense. And I knew that there were a lot of deals out there. In fact, I was arranging mortgages for people that were buying properties really, really cheaply. But I had a problem in that I had no money myself. As I said, I just lost some money through bad ventures and bad decisions. And also, the lenders were so tight that they just weren't lending. You couldn't get the buy-to-let mortgages that very easily like you can nowadays. You could get them, but it was very difficult. And certainly, I wasn't in that position to do that for various reasons. But I knew that there were certain kinds of properties in East London that could easily be turned into 5-room HMOs. They had 3 bedrooms, but one of the bedrooms could easily be split because there was 2 windows, so that could be split to make a 4th bedroom, and you could use the living room downstairs to make a 5th bedroom. And these properties were really cheap. Now, I knew about this because I was doing mortgages for people who were buying these properties, and they were making a lot of money out of it. And very quickly they grew from nothing to having around 8 or 9 properties, and they were turning over something like £500,000 a year from a kitchen-based business where it was just stuff in the kitchen that ran that business. Very clever couple. There was a lady and a husband who was a bit of a builder as well, so he would go in and do the painting and decorating, but it was very light refurbishments. Now, these properties were selling for £65,000. I still cry about it nowadays. £65,000. They're now worth like £500,000. And I knew that these were prime deals because I knew that by splitting them into rooms, there was a good income to be had from that. And I knew that this particular client of mine was raising deposits within a few months based on the profits from their portfolio. Now, the problem was as I said, I was broke, I had no cash, lending was super tight. So I put together a little plan and approached some people that had money and said, look, this is what we want to do. And I've still got that plan somewhere. It's a 2 or 3 page, very simple plan. We buy these properties, we split them into rooms, and in 4 or 5 years' time, they would have gone up. And I think at that time I was estimating they'd probably be worth £200,000 or £300,000. They've gone up a lot more than that. But I knew that the prices were at rock bottom. And unfortunately, I approached 2 or 3 people and they just couldn't see it. They said, well, I can't really see it. I didn't quite know how to structure that type of deal where you just go to somebody and say, I need your money and this is how we're going to do it. So basically I was sort of disheartened, disillusioned, so I gave up. And, it still grieves me that I didn't push a little bit hard or approach more people and find that money and often pass that street. And, I know that these houses are worth a lot more. And, I always sort of wonder what if. But obviously it's too late now. And now I've got a different mindset, but I could raise that money very easily. Nowadays, I would make a couple of calls and say, look, we've got these deals, and here we go. And I think there will be opportunities like that in the coming years. There's bound to be a downturn at some stage. The market just can't keep going up and up and up and up. Now, I'll give you a contrast of somebody that was like me, had gone to sort of broke status, but his mind was not at broke level. His mind was still up there. And that was a guy called Jim Slater. Now, the younger ones of you might not know who Jim Slater is, but Jim Slater in the 60s was kind of like he would have been equivalent to a billionaire now. If he was a billionaire or not, I don't know, but he would be equivalent to a billionaire kind of status. He owned funds and insurance companies, and he was an early mentor to the billionaire Sir James Goldsmith, the father of Zach Goldsmith and Jemima Goldsmith. And James Goldsmith, actually talks about Jim Slater. He said Jim Slater taught him so much about how to become a corporate raider, to buy companies and use the company shares as the security to raise the money to buy those companies, and then they would break them up and split them into smaller units and sell off parts of the business and still be left with, even after you've paid off loans and that's what you'd still be left with a huge profit. And these deals could make billions of pounds for people. And Sir James Goldsmith and Jim Slater did this. But the problem is something went wrong with one of his funds, and there was a bit of a downturn, and Jim Slater kind of lost everything. So it was a very interesting story how this guy went from billionaire to nothing. Now, what I've read since is that although he'd lost everything in money terms, he had not lost his mind, he'd not lost his money mindset. And what he did, within a few years, he'd bounced back and made a huge fortune again. Now, how he did this, he approached people and said, look, I know that there's a property downturn, the property's at the rock bottom. Now, and what he did, he got some friends together and financed the money to buy warehouses along the river. I think Fulham was one of the areas, and he bought warehouses along the river, and they converted them into luxury apartments, these warehouse style apartments, and he literally made a fortune from that. And within a few years, his wealth had bounced up again. Now, isn't that interesting? He had property ideas, I had property ideas, but he went to his friends and got that money immediately. Now, you could argue, say, well, it was all right for him, he had all these friends in the city. But you could also say that he had the vision, the foresight, and the right mindset to do these things and go back to people and say, right, I can do this again, back me up, and we'll make a fortune for each other. Now, this is why many billionaires and multimillionaires believe that if they lost everything today, they would soon bounce back and be back on top. Now, don't forget, only a few years ago, Donald Trump's, one of his businesses, his whole business empire was in Chapter 11 bankruptcy. So they were saying he was on his way out, but he bounced back, didn't he? And I'm sure that if Richard Branson lost it all today, I'm sure that it wouldn't be long before he had be back on top, right? He's not going to sort of lose everything and be on the streets, is he? Now, much of Richard Branson's fortune has been made using other people's money anyway. So, they use his ideas. He uses other people's ideas and money and backs them using the Virgin name. So I'm sure that people like him would not be down for too long if they lost everything. So just remember that, first of all, that if you have the right deal and you have a strategy for making money, there is more money out there chasing these sort of deals than there is deals. There's more venture capitalists out there with money to invest than you would believe. Look at San Francisco, for instance, how people can go out there and on an idea raise 10, 20 million just like that. I was talking to someone the other day, a friend of mine that is now working she said, I'm working for a tech startup. So I'm thinking, tech startup in London, is it just her and a few people in a serviced office room somewhere? No, this is a tech startup in Bond Street with big offices. They're employing 200 people. They're a kind of a publishing company. She explained what they do, but I still don't understand it. But, they've obviously raised some serious money. They're employing 200 people. They've got an office in New York. They've got another one in Israel. This is a tech startup. My own son worked for a company that was a tech startup a few years ago, The young guy who'd raised the money raised something like $20 million to set up a company dealing with gaming platforms, something to do with advertising on gaming platforms. And I saw this guy across the other day. He looked like a kid. The office was like some basketball court where there was lots of playing going on and lots of activities going on. It didn't look like there was much work going on. They have massive drinks cabinets and food everywhere. But this company is now making millions. I joke about it really, but this kid went out to America. He raised $20 million to set up a tech startup, and now it's making millions of dollars per month. It will probably soon be taken over for God knows how many millions. But so he had the right mentality, didn't he? He didn't just think, well, I've got this idea, but there's no money around. He knew there was money around, so there is money around. So just have that mentality, that mindset to know that there is an abundance of money out there. So if you have an idea, just go out and get it. So that's all for now. This has been Charles Kelly, bringing you money tips to help you save, earn, invest, accumulate, and enjoy more money. Thanks for listening.